Hey, how y'all doing? I just want to take a couple minutes here and kind of walk through a workflow that I developed for Dynamo that I think could be useful for folks. It revolves around making type catalogs. I had posted on LinkedIn that I was creating a bunch of types and putting them inside of a template file for use for loading into a main project file. And somebody asked, well, why don't you use family type catalogs? And my response back to them was that the default export of family types from the family environment doesn't give you all the parameters or all the options that you really need. So, for instance, on the screen here, we've got a door family, and I have several nested panels that are inside of this that are all attached to a label. So when I change the option inside the family here in terms of door frame or door panel, this is actually a shared family um, parameter. It's a family type and it's a parameter that's shared. And we use that so that we can also tag and label those parameters and schedule them in the actual project. So if you watch here for just a second, if I go up and I go and do a standard export family types, just throw on my desktop here. Then if we go open that up, um, you will see that this file here, and say if I just search real quick for panel, which is what the door, it doesn't find it. And if I go same thing here for frame, it doesn't find it, which means it did not export out the parameters um, for the frame type or the panel type, which is pretty important when you're trying to use a type catalog. Plus, I also have noticed that it exports out a lot of parameters. Like, for instance, this 224, I know for a fact, is a calculation based on the door width and the exiting or egress factor that we have built into the doors. So it's also exporting out parameter values that are calculated via formula, which we really don't need because the family has the formula within them. So as long as the other parameters and values are there, it's going to give you the value that you want. So that I put together a Dynamo graph that can be used for a couple different things. But really, I mean, obviously, the main point is to do a little bit smarter way of exporting the type catalog. So in here, a couple of Python nodes that I've put together here. This one's pretty straightforward. It just kind of it jumps in. Obviously, you're in the family environment, assumes that. So it's going to grab all the parameters that are within the family, um, and then it's going to cycle through them. So it automatically checks to see if you have a formula. If the parameter is using a formula, it's out of the list. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to cycle through all the types that are preloaded within this family, and we're going to check if that type has a value for the parameter. If we cycle through all the types and not one single type has a value plugged in for the parameter, then we're going to kick it out of the list as well. Um, then we're going to check, the last thing is that if our parameters list already contains the parameter, um, if it does not, excuse me, if it does not already contain the parameter, then we're going to add the parameter to the parameters list. We're going to get the parameter name out to the names list, and then we're also going to get the parameter group. Now, this parameter group could be a bit of an optional piece. I'm using it to sort my parameters together within uh, the list view data from the UI, the data shapes package. So it's just a way that I'm using to kind of group it. And then I'm exporting out those three different groups. You'll see here I've just got a little code block. So what I'm doing in this first line is I'm actually adding the parameter group, a hyphen, a couple spaces, and then the parameter name. That's what we're going to be using for our keys. The value is obviously the parameter itself, the parameter object, and then just some additional settings. So we're using, again, the data shapes package. Got to be my favorite package of anything that's out there um, for sure. So we're using a list view. We're going to list all those out. And then we're also going to have the file path um, node so that we can pick where we want to export this file out to. And just obviously the rest of our settings for our multi-form input. And on the back side of this, what I've got is another Python node. It's a little bit more in depth, but what it is doing is it is taking the path obviously coming in, and it's also taking the parameters that we will select once we run it. Once we have those parameters selected, again, we're going to run through, we're going to get the types. So again, we're going to collect every type that's in the family, and then we are going to cycle each parameter, um, and then we are going to check the parameter type. And the reason we're going to be checking the parameter type is because depending on what type of parameter it is how we're going to kind of export out the first line in a family types catalog, which is where it tells the parameter of the type and um, what we're going to use to define the measurement type. So this is obviously set up for fractional feet. I'm in the US, so that's what I'm going to use, uh, pushing that through. But from the different things I could find online, that basically these top six are the only parameters that get defined as a specific thing. So length, area, volume, slope, angle, and currency all have their own specific identifier. Every other parameter type just gets defined as other with no unit of any kind. So this is what we're going to use to define the different fields or the header information. Once we have all that put together, um, then what we're going to do is we're going to cycle back through all the family types, uh, and we're going to add the name because the family type name is the first thing that goes in the list, and then just jump through here. We're going to find the again the parameter type. We're going to find the storage type. That becomes important here in a minute. And then the value is how we're going to string all this information together. So again, each parameter can only have one of, I think it's 5 different storage types. So there's double, there's integer, string, element ID. Maybe it's only 4 types then. Um, so there's only 4 types, but depending upon um, what the parameter type is and the parameter storage type will be able to tell us how we want to do different units. So for instance, things like that has the storage type of double is your angle, your slope, and obviously your length. Those are the things that are doubles. So here I'm doing some unit conversions on those to make sure that things are in decimal degrees, make sure that we're using the slope degrees and some different pieces to do those conversions like we would want to have them. Then we go on to things that are integers. So we just want to make sure that we get those values as integers. Something to keep in mind that yes, no parameters do use an integer. So 1 for yes, 0 for no. String and then element ID. Element IDs are important if you do have nested families. If you have materials, all those things are actually have an element ID storage type. And we'll use that element ID to actually get the element itself and then get the element name, which is the value that we need for the type catalog. So we'll collect all that information, filter everything down through, and then we're going to add that value to the name, which is what we did on the very top, and then finally kind of export that out. Once we've cycled through all the different family types, just use a simple stream writer, which is a system IO path that you need to make sure that you get up here. I've just imported the stream writer from the systems collection. So that's something to make sure to pay attention on what I've got up here for references, because there are a couple that may not be typicals. Um, and then just write this thing out. So that's kind of how straightforward it is. Then what I'll show is run this thing. So hit run. Oh, make sure you set this to true in terms of the toggle. So now we're going to run this. What you can see here is I get a list of parameters. And what I was saying was that these parameters are kind of sorted out by their parameter type. Um, so in this case, I want to make sure I take the door panel and the door frame. I am going to take all the geometry, which are dimension parameters, and then I want to make sure I take all the materials. So that's just what I'm going to take for right now, um, just kind of as a test here to show you what I'm talking about. We're going to go find, we're just going to use that same types catalog file, hit create, see this thing completed. And what we just did is we created a type catalog for 67 um, different doors. So now if we jump back over here and we open this back up, what you can see here is if I go and I look for panel, you can tell here it's only looks like about the third um, parameter that was exported. You can see here we got a flush door, a flush glaze 2. You can see that we have a flush glazed narrow. So you can see that those panels are in there. And this M4, M4, HM-B, those are the M4 there. Those are actually our frame, our door frame types as well. So we have now captured that information as well as some additional um, stuff for materials, but we've also made sure we've taken out all the parameters that are calculated. We don't need those that are via formula. And you can see here that we also made sure that all of our parameters are in the right format, very similar to the previous one. So now, if I get back out of this, if I go jump into just a simple dinky little project we've got here, and if I want to load this family in, you see I'm presented with a pretty large type catalog. I'm just going to grab a few of them here, pull those in, um, and we can drop some doors down. And you can see that that family panel came in correctly. A louver door came in correctly. Um, let's see, just the half glazed came in correctly. And then if we jump here to a better view, you can see this is a hollow metal panel. Here is a wood panel. So our materials came, our panel dimensions came, the different uh, panel types also came. And then you'll also see if I happen to grab one, we've got that is supposed to be our butt frame, but you can notice here that in these parameters that the center butt frame did not come over because that was not one of the parameters I selected. So that's one way you can start to try to manipulate them if you want to, or just make sure you bring those parameters with you when you select them. So you can see that didn't come with it when I brought it over. But yeah, so that's my kind of quick way that I wrote a graph, put a graph together that was hopefully a little bit easier to manipulate, kind of pick which parameters you want, and also get some additional functionality that I couldn't get out of the default family types exporter. If you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks.